What happens when freedom of speech and corporate America collide? Do you have freedom of speech in the workplace? Can your employer control your speech outside the workplace? My name is Nicholas Miller, and we examine these questions on Protest and Liberty Today. In part one, we discussed three cases: Roseanne Barr, whose racist tweet caused ABC to shut down her show; NFL players who were kneeling, and now the NFL has ruled that they can no longer do that or face fines and penalties; and then a third case of a lawyer in Manhattan, Aaron Schlossberg, who was caught on video criticizing Spanish speakers for speaking Spanish at work, and he had his lease canceled. There's something called non-disparagement clauses, and these require that you not be heard as criticizing members of other races, genders, ethnicities, sexual orientations, and if you do, you can lose your lease, and it doesn't matter whether that criticism happens on the job or at the location or not. Many of us who are concerned about civil liberties view this as a development that concerns us. So how should these three different cases come out? Well, I think you have to ask the question, first of all, how close is the speech to the time and place of the job itself? Will the speech be associated with the job? And thirdly, how inherently offensive is the speech? So I think each of these cases comes down a little bit differently. Let's start with the NFL and the NFL players there. Yes, these NFL players are on the job when they're carrying out their protest, but this is a bit different in my view because the NFL is granted a monopoly on professional football. So the government has created the NFL as really the only game in town. And it's, in a sense, a quasi-government actor in that regard. And I think there needs to be a different calculus then as to how narrowly it can limit the protest of its players, especially if that protest and language is not inherently offensive. There's no racial epithets being used. Rather, people are simply quietly kneeling, which most people in most places recognize as a symbol of humility, of devotion, even of respect. So I think there's a very real case to be made that these NFL players should be able to speak their mind on these political questions at this time. Roseanne Barr, on the other hand, I view as being so centrally identified with her show. It's named after her, isn't it? And her tweet was so offensive in terms of comparing a black lady with an ape. It's just horrible racist language, and I really think that ABC had almost little or no choice to do what they did. Her significance in the show makes it difficult for her to argue that she is not doing something that reflects directly on her employer. Now, just to show that I'm not just taking the left-wing side of this, I think the Aaron Schlossberg case, the lawyer who criticized the Spanish-speaking employees in the restaurant, he didn't do it on office space, he didn't do it on his work time or in a way that was associated with his legal practice. And despite the fact that he's ignorant and possibly racist, though he speaks Spanish himself and advertises that as part of his business, I think it goes too far to have his lease canceled. There's a bar complaint that's been filed against him, and I do think that's appropriate. The bar should probably offer some kind of censure, but I think it would be going too far to remove his law license or right to practice law. We live in a day and age where corporations and corporate America are very, very influential in our lives, and we have to think about the protections of the Bill of Rights and their importance to us, and the need to have these freedoms respected not just by the government, but by corporate America itself. And I think the government and courts need to start thinking along these lines. If we don't do that, there won't be much room for protest these days, and hence not much room for liberty either. And that is protest and liberty today.